UFC Vegas 63 betting and DraftKings show. We have 11 fights this Saturday. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. Kicking things off in the bantamweight division, Christian Rodriguez comes in as a sizable favorite at minus 365. The comeback on Joshua Weems is plus 300. And here we have two guys that are former Dana White Contender Series prospects. They both fought not on this past season, but the one before that back in 2021. And Weems ended up getting finished in the first round by Fernie Garcia in that spot. And Rodriguez did get the win against Junior Cortez, but was not impressive enough to win a contract. So he later made his UFC debut against Jonathan Pierce, and while everybody was kind of counting him out in that spot, he actually gave a pretty good account of himself. You know, it seemed like he had power in his punches, seemed like he hurt Pierce a couple times, stung him on the feet, landed a takedown in that fight as well, showed off a little bit of wrestling. And on the flip side, Joshua Weems is kind of like, I compared him to Jordan Wright, the Beverly Hills Ninja, in my article this week, because that's the style of fighter that he is. He has a ton of finishes on the regional scene, but he's fought a very low level of competition, and he's really only going to have that short window of opportunity early in the fight. He's more of an opportunistic submission grappler. 8 of his 11 wins have come by submission. He does have some powerful leg kicks as well, but again, the cardio seems to not quite be there, and neither does the durability as well. As soon as Fernie Garcia landed 1 or 2 good punches, it was like he just wilted away, and that's kind of what I could see happening here against Christian Rodriguez, who does seem to have a little bit of power. I mentioned he stung Pierce in that fight. He was stinging Junior Cortez back in the Contender Series fight. He does have some power in his punches as well. I just think it's a matter of time before Rodriguez stings him and gets him out of there. So this is one for DraftKings. I'm going to target both sides because I am expecting an early finish, and I like the under. Again, this is the way that Weems fights. He's a kill or be killed style of fighter, similar to the Beverly Hills Ninja. So I'm rocking with the under here. The official pick is going to be Rodriguez by knockout. And next up in the flyweight division, we have Carlos Mota making his UFC debut. He's a minus 165 favorite currently. The comeback on Cody Durden is plus 140. And this Mota kid, he's the former flyweight champion over in LFA. He seems to have a good, solid skill set. Just fought really a couple months ago. Won by knockout in that spot. Does have power in his hands, and he's very explosive with his striking, but he's a high fight IQ guy. He isn't just going to sell out completely for the finish. I love the way that he works the body, and that, I think, is going to be key in this fight against Cody Durden, who we know historically has had cardio issues in the past. Durden's not a bad fighter. He has a little bit of pop in his punches as well, and obviously goes to the wrestling in a lot of these spots, but he doesn't have the gas tank to push that pace for 15 minutes. We've seen him slow basically every time he's forced into the later rounds, and I think that body work of Mota is really going to pay dividends as the fight goes on. I think we see a finish in here as well, so I'll be looking at an under in this fight as well. I'll have exposure to both sides, but the official pick is going to be Mota by knockout. I think he's got the goods this weekend. Up next, this one's in the featherweight division as Chase Hooper comes in as minus 295 favorite. The comeback on Steve Garcia is plus 245. Chase Hooper is coming off a career best performance, in my opinion, against Felipe Colares, who he basically just dominated throughout that fight. Did get a 3rd round TKO finish there. I bet him in finish only markets in that fight, so he paid off for me there. I think he's going to pay off again. This seems to be a good stylistic matchup for him. I don't expect him to have the striking advantage because while he has developed a little bit offensively, the defense is just simply not there. He's going to eat a lot of clean punches, but so far he's proven to be very durable. Steve Garcia is a power puncher, 9 knockout victories, not super durable himself, but I just think Hooper will be able to get this fight to the mat. His wrestling seems to be coming along. He can pull guard here. He's going to have multiple ways to get this fight into grappling exchanges, and that's where I think he's levels better than Garcia on the mat, and I think he can cut through him. So Hooper by submission is the official pick, and I think he's a solid target on DraftKings as well. Up next in the middleweight division, Jung Young Park takes on Joseph Holmes. He's a minus 225 favorite. The comeback on Holmes is plus 190. And this one, I think, comes down, for me, it basically just comes down to 2 key areas. And it's going to be the wrestling and it's going to be the cardio. And I think both of which favor Jun Young Park here. Cardio, I think, has been an issue for Joseph Holmes historically. You know, he's typically more of a finisher, but the times he has been pushed outside of, you know, the first 7 minutes of the fight, he definitely starts to slow down the defense. You know, he drops his hands and he really starts to struggle. And I think that could happen here against a guy like Park, who's basically made a career out of being able to maintain a high output, high pace, mix in the wrestling for 15 minutes if he needs to. And I think that's what's going to happen here. Park averages around 2 takedowns per 15 minutes. Holmes only defends at 60%. Holmes has never been a guy that I've rated very highly. You know, he's very long for the division, going to have like a 7-inch reach advantage here, but he just, the way that he fights, he doesn't know how to use that length to his advantage. And he's young, he's still improving. It's possible we could see some leaps there, but until I see it, I really think Park could fight behind his jab here, out volume him, take him down, control him on the mat as well. So give me Park by decision. That's the official pick. Overall, I actually think this is not one of the best fights to target on DraftKings, so I'm really just looking to limit my exposure on both sides of this one. Up next in the heavyweight division, Marcos Rogerio de Lima comes in as a -245 favorite. The comeback on Andrei Arlovsky is +205, and this one is concerning anytime you see de Lima as a sizable favorite in the UFC, not because he's not talented, because I do think he's the more explosive fighter here. He has basically all the finishing potential as well. 16 of his 19 wins have come inside the distance. So I'm not saying he can't finish here, and I actually am picking him to get a finish. I'm expecting him to win by knockout. I think that's the most likely outcome, but I would really not be laying chalk on de Lima in this spot. Arlovsky has a way of fighting competitively, especially as he goes to decision quite a bit. We just saw Jake Collier, who I had a bet on. I thought Collier won. It's giving me a little bit of PTSD even thinking about that fight, but it just speaks to the fact that Arlovsky, even at a big underdog price, if he can just make it to the judges' scorecards, even if it kind of looks like he's losing, he might be competitive enough to steal rounds. And against de Lima, who's known for being a front runner, doesn't have the best gas tank, I favor him significantly in round 1. But there's definitely a world where he fades after round 1, and Arlovsky, you know, with that decent cardio, just his stay on the outside, stick and move with his jab, I think there's a world where he can win rounds 2 and 3 and get his hand raised here. So I'm not really looking to target this fight on DraftKings because Arlovsky, his upside is like a low-scoring, striking-based decision, which he might not even win in that scenario, whereas de Lima's upside is probably a knockout finish. So I'm probably going to have a little bit of the de Lima side, but not much of Arlovsky. Overall, it's going to be a fight that I'm looking to be underweight to both sides on DraftKings. And up next in the middleweight division, Phil Hawes comes in as a -170 favorite. The comeback on Roman Delite is +145, and I really like the Phil Hawes side of this matchup. I think Hawes is a potential parlay piece, which is probably famous last words, saying Phil Hawes is a nice parlay piece this weekend, but I really think he has Delite covered pretty much in all areas. Delite is a guy who is powerful, don't get me wrong. He's got a bunch of knockouts on his record. We just saw him knock out Kyle Dawkins, and I was big on Dawkins in that spot. I know a bunch of other people were as well. Delite got the win there. The thing is if he can't knock out Phil Hawes, which of course he can, Phil Hawes has been knocked out multiple times before. Delite has power. We just went over that. But outside of an early knockout, I really don't see much of a path to victory for Delite here. His cardio is very bad. It's not even like below average. It's just straight up not good. Like, we've seen him fade every single time he's pushed out of the first round. I think Phil Hawes has kind of proved the naysayers wrong when talking about his cardio, and I was one of them. It's like he seemed like a front runner early on in his career. Now we've seen him go to deep waters, go and get tested over 15 minutes if he needs to, and pass that test. Looked great in his last fight as well. Obviously got the collegiate wrestling to fall back on here, and I think he's the more powerful striker as well. So I just think Phil Hawes can win this wherever the fight goes and however long the fight goes. So give me Phil Hawes by knockout. That's the official pick. I like him in a parlay this weekend. I like him on DraftKings as well. Do not fail me, Phil Hawes. And next up, we have Dustin Jacoby coming in as a -170 favorite. The comeback on Khalil Roundtree is +145. And this one is my least confident read on the entire card. For starters, I don't really have a good read on Khalil Roundtree. I think it's tough for me because it's like, on one hand, I expect him to look one way. He looks the polar opposite. And then I'm like, okay, well, now I can trust him. Looks terrible the next time out. And then last time out against Carl Roberson, he just looked career best to me. I mean, absolutely big brother Carl Roberson in that spot. Got the finish, looked shredded, looked great. Everything checks all the boxes. The thing is I can't get other fights that he's had in the past out of my head, and maybe that's a fault on me. But like the Prachniow fight comes to mind as a big red flag here against a kickboxer like Dustin Jacoby, who I think is going to have more volume. I think this one could come down to very competitive rounds. Both guys, I don't really think are going to look to mix in takedowns here. So I'm expecting a kickboxing match for as long as this one lasts. It might just come down to the volume of Jacoby versus the power shots of Khalil Roundtree. So I typically use power as the big equalizer, right, and side with the power, but I'm actually leaning towards Jacoby. I just think he's a more proven kickboxer. I think he could stay defensively sound. The dude has not lost a fight in the UFC. He's 6-0-1 with the draw against Ion Cutelaba. So I know I've looked to fade him in the past, but at this point, it's like you got to give the guy some respect. So I'm going with Jacoby here. Jacoby by decision is the official pick, but again, just giving you a fair warning, I do not feel good about this fight. So I'm expecting to be wrong. So maybe that means you guys should pile in on Roundtree, but I'm going to sit on the sidelines. Hopefully Jacoby gets his hand raised. And up next is Josh Fremd, a minus 155 favorite. The comeback on Trey Gore is plus 135. These guys were originally booked to fight a couple months ago. Fremd did pull out of that. So now we're getting them this weekend, and it's a pretty decent matchup. I think Fremd has looked pretty good throughout his run over in LFA promotion. Trayshawn Gore obviously coming off the Ultimate Fighter. Gore is a guy who is a good striker, right? He's got fast hands. He seems to hit pretty powerful as well. The output is just not there for me, and I hate backing guys that I can't expect to throw a ton of volume because they're just limiting their paths to victory, right? Like, because in that fight against Brian Battle, it was clear Gore's the better striker. It was clear that when Gore landed, he was hurting Battle almost every single time. You look at the guys' faces in that fight, and it's like Battle got beat up. He won the fight, and I agree that he won the fight. It's because Gore, he just doesn't let his hands go. He just doesn't do enough. And for somebody that's not going to look to proactively grapple, you better be throwing volume or you better be knocking guys out. And I just can't bank on him to do either of those things. So against Josh Fremd, who I think is a decent opponent here, had a tough UFC debut against Fluffy Hernandez, who's looked great recently in the UFC, so I'm not going to knock him too much for that. He even had moments in that fight as well. So I just think Fremd, the striking is going to be competitive. Fremd has power himself, and then I think he's the more well-rounded fighter, more likely to mix in the wrestling, should have a grappling advantage. So give me Fremd. Fremd by decision is the official pick. Overall on DraftKings, I don't think either guy has much of a ceiling, so I'm probably going to look to limit my exposure on this one. And up next, we have a heavyweight fight between Waldo Cortez Acosta, minus 200 favorite, with Jared Vanderaa on the comeback at plus 170. And as always, it's a heavyweight fight, low level. There's going to be extra variance in these type of matchups, but I do side with Acosta here, even making his UFC debut, coming in with a decent amount of market respect here, but I get it. He's a 7-0 prospect, 4 wins by knockout. He's the former LFA heavyweight champion, coming off the first round knockout on Dana White Contender Series this past season. And I just think stylistically, he matches up pretty well with a guy like Jared Vanderaa. Vanderaa is known to be a punching bag on the feet. Vanderaa, what we like about him is that he has heart and he has decent cardio for the heavyweight division. But the guy is a punching bag. He fights with a very low fight IQ. You know, we all remember him going into Alexei Oleinik, going to the ground with him when he had the fight basically won, and then he ended up getting submitted. So the fight IQ certainly isn't there. And where he typically has a cardio advantage, I'm not sure he's going to have that against Acosta here. Acosta actually does have decent cardio for the heavyweight division, comes from a boxing background, and he throws volume, and he will carry his power for a couple rounds. So I actually really think he's a pretty solid pick here at minus 200. I think he's a solid target on DraftKings as well, because I do think the knockout is the most likely outcome here. So there's always some heavyweight variance. I wouldn't shy away from targeting Vanderaa if you're running multiple lineups on DraftKings, but I'm definitely going to have more on the Acosta side. Acosta by knockout is the official pick. And up next in the co-main event, we have Max Griffin, a minus 190 favorite, with Tim Dirty Bird Means on the comeback at plus 160. And I gotta say, I like the Griffin side in this one. Another guy who I think has a clear cardio advantage in this fight. We talked about that with Jung Young Park earlier. I think Griffin fits that mold as well. Tim Means, definitely on the back end of his career, knocking on 40. He's almost 39 years old, and we've seen the cardio and the durability really start to come into question here. He's been finished in 8 of his 13 professional losses, and I think Max Griffin is a guy that has underrated power. This guy's landed 7 knockdowns in the UFC, 8 knockouts on his record overall, and I just think he's going to have a power advantage on the feet, and he's going to have a cardio advantage, so I'd expect him to take over as the fight goes on if that finish doesn't materialize, but I think it does. I'm going to go Griffin by knockout. That's the official pick. Which brings us to our main event, which is obviously the best fight of the entire card, and it's currently lined as a pick'em. We have Calvin Kattar going up against Arnold Allen, and I actually think we're getting a discount on Calvin Kattar here. He's obviously my guy. The Boston Cartel is repping this weekend. I like Calvin Kattar here. I think it sets up as a good matchup for him stylistically speaking. Arnold Allen is a very good fighter, don't get me wrong, but I really think there's multiple advantages for Calvin Kattar. For my money, Kattar is still one of the better strikers in the division and on the UFC roster. I think where we've seen Kattar exposed is really only against that elite tier. Guys like Max Holloway obviously did lose the split against Josh Emmett, but I just don't think Arnold Allen is going to be able to compete with the volume of Calvin Kattar. This guy historically is a pretty low output fighter, and that's even in 3 rounds. You know, he's not going to be able to clinch up against the cage. Calvin Kattar mix in the takedowns very often or be able to control him. Kattar historically has very good takedown defense, so I'm expecting this one to mainly play out at range, and that's where I think Calvin Kattar is very difficult to beat. He manages his range very well, has one of the better jabs in the UFC, has the powerful elbows that he's going to mix in as well. So even though I respect the game of Arnold Allen, I actually think over the course of 25 minutes, and I do expect this to go the full 25 minutes, I think the volume, I think the power, and the overall well-roundedness of Calvin Kattar's striking ability is going to pay dividends here. So give me Calvin Kattar by decision. That's the official pick, and I'll be betting on the Boston Cartel this weekend. And as always, guys, you can check out fightnumbers.com, where I'll have DraftKings player rankings broken down by salary tier. I'll have ownership projections as well. It's all completely free. Fightnumbers.com. I appreciate it, guys. Best of luck, and we'll see you guys next time.